Well, first of all, Mr. Stevens, what was it like being 18 and going into the military?
That's a very good question. It at 18, whether we like to think it or not, we're just almost a child yet, you know. And we, I heard that they were getting ready to draft the 18-year-olds, and I thought, well, I'd better get in there and beat them to it. So anyway, I did enter the Army March 1st, 1943.
What were some of your duties at that time?
Uh,
What were you trained to do?
basic training, what they call basic training, and it consisted of calisthenics, and it was basic training was a 6 weeks program, and you really got in better shape at the end of the 6 weeks. There was a lot of physical training, you know, running, walking, so on, running and to a fabricated fence, I guess you would call it. Anyway, it was about 12 feet high, and you had to run and climb over that. And that was about the hardest part of the basic training.
At what point did you go overseas?
In 19 and 1944, towards towards the end of 1944, and we were on a troop ship, and it I think it held 6,000 or 7,000 soldiers, and we went into a convoy, and if you got up on deck, you could see the convoy, the battleships circling around, completely around your position, and it was still pretty cold up on deck, but we got to trying to think of the name of that island. There's an island out there before you get to the English Channel. But anyway, we got to the English Channel, and went on down, and we couldn't understand why they continued to go forward, and went on down to Le Havre, France. And
You were one of the first people to go there, correct?
yeah, the one and only group that went directly to the continent of Europe, you know. And they unloaded us. We had to climb down a rope ladder that was thrown over the side of the ship. And when you got down there, you were landed in I think they call it an LST, a landing craft. And when they got it full, they went forward, but they couldn't go up on the it was cold. It was plain old cold. And so anyway, that brought us up to the place that we were getting ready to join our division, and they transported us in what they call the 40 and 8 box cars, and all they had was a little straw in it. And, so anyway,
Well, they call it the 40 by 8 because you could fit 40 people or 8 horses. Is that what they say?
right, yeah, you're familiar with that. That's exactly what they were in World War I, you know. And so anyway, thank goodness they didn't have the horses when we got in. And we traveled for in these boxcars for 2 or 3 days, and went down to I'm never able to recall. Some of these little old burgs had just farmers that were there. But anyway, we stopped, which would be very close to Metz, France. And we stopped there one night, and you didn't have much sleep. But anyway, our company commander was up and wide awake, and I happened to be outside too, so I challenged him, and he gave me the password and says, "This is Captain McFarland." I said, "Yes, sir, I recognize you, and you're at liberty to do what you want." And he said, "Well, thank you," and went on. He was checking the guards, is what it amounted to, you know. And we didn't stay there very long, and got in a convoy that was going up to Sarlaten. Mentioning Sarlaten again here after a while, but the Germans had half of Sarlaten. There was a river that came through there. I think it was the Saar River, and the Germans are on one side. The front wasn't active, not doing a thing, and we were on the other. But anyway, in the convoy going in, the truck in front of us slid off of the road and hit a mine, and it just blew that truck all to pieces. And thank goodness it was out of the way, and our convoy proceeded on. We never did know what become of who was driving or anything, but and there would have been people in the back of this truck, soldiers, you know. So anyway, we went on and occupied half of Sarlaten, which was on our side of the lines, and it was amazing that there was absolutely no activity. Uh, no artillery, no nothing. And it stayed that way for quite a while. And anyway, I was up early one morning. We occupied German houses, and there was nothing in there. All you could do was sleep on the floor, you know. And I was up early one morning, and there's a big church, and it's still there. My cousin in California says, I've been to Sarlotten. She says, that church you spoke about is still there. And it was on an outer corner of Sarlotten. And it was still dark, and I was just, well, couldn't sleep, so I stayed up. And I looked over at that church, and on the steeple, there was a light way up there in the steeple. And I thought, well, I wonder what's going on. Anyway, it was a German that was signaling the artillery. And so, thank goodness, my company commander was right close, and I told him the story. He says, I'm going over there right now. And after a while, the light went out. So, anyway.
You told me a story about getting prepared to break through the Siegfried line.
Yeah.
Can you tell that story?
That, yes. And here again, to travel on ahead a little bit, Major Hoagland approached me. I was working in the intelligence department as a combat infantryman, and he says, Sergeant Steve, I've got a bad situation that I hope you can take care of. He says, you're the only one that I trust with it. And he said, back where we broke through the Siegfried line yesterday, he said we've traveled about 10 or 15 miles since then. But he said, back there exactly where we broke through the Siegfried line, there's a cultivated field that wasn't cultivated yesterday, and there's a German corpse lying in that field. Said it's probably a huge, robust, elderly German, and said we don't know how he was deceased, but anyway, he said, I want you to go back, take your Jeep driver, Burbeck, and he says there's a beaten path that leads up to this corpse. He says, be very careful, stay on that beaten path, which is what we did after we parked there, and wound it around to where the corpse was. We were getting along fine, no problems, and Burbeck leaned over and rummaged through the pockets of this deceased German, and he didn't come up with anything of value. But anyway, it was a corpse that our country and the Allies had to get those corpses and take them to a distance from there, and they would eventually be buried in a cemetery. So we didn't have any part of that. But guess we can go home now, right? I said, well, let's wait a little bit. And he stepped back 1 foot, I'll never forget it, and landed on a mine with his right leg and fell back, didn't say a word, was unconscious, and he had stepped on a shoe mine. They called it a shoe mine. And that's exactly what it was for, to step a shoe on, and it would explode. And at that time, immediately after he lost his leg, I backed up a little bit to see if I could be of any help, and I stepped on something that blew me in the air. Seemed like I was going up about 6 feet, and then I come right straight down and landed on this beaten path. Thank goodness I did, because this mine that blew me up was designed to throw me over into this cultivated field where there would be all kinds of mines. And so anyway, I was unconscious for, I haven't any idea how long, didn't know at the time. And when I finally woke up, I didn't feel anything too bad, but I had a fractured vertebra that I've lived with ever since. But when I did wake up, I looked over probably 300 or 400 feet, and there was 2 medics with stretchers ready to come in and get us. And I wasn't very alert yet, and I motioned like that, stay back. And they didn't stay back. They went right into that plowed field, cultivated field, and both of them lost their leg. And we thought, well, what a sad situation that was, to be trying to recover wounded soldiers and then be wounded yourself, So, anyway, Colonel Sampson D. Anton, my friend, and I was acquainted with him from Marceline, Missouri, had brought his aid station. He was a doctor, and he brought his aid station right up. We were right next to it. But anyway, his medics came in with stretchers, and we told them to stay on that beaten path. And they got us out and took us into Colonel Anton's medical station. And he says, well, Sergeant Steve, what on earth are you doing here? And I said, I don't know, sir, but I was in hopes you did. He said, well, you can be assured that we're going to give you good treatment. And to make the story short, we ended up in a major hospital that's located between France and Germany. I can't for the life of me remember the name of that. But anyway, this hospital is a big one, and it's in it's a city and a country all in one. So I was there and not feeling too bad, a little bit of difficulty in the back, and I was in there 3 weeks, and I thought, I was up and walking and so on. I thought, well, I'd sure like to get out of here. And they, about that time, Major Hoagland came in. He said, Sergeant Steve, are you ready to get out of here? I said, I sure am. He said, well, get your clothes on, and we're going back to headquarters and finish the rest of the war peaceably, we hope. So that happened, and our troops were moving to Passau, P-A-S-S-A-U, on the German and Austrian border, and we went through there, had some resistance at that point, the German holdout, and went on down to Linz, Austria, and Linz is on the Danube River, and Mauthausen prison camp was located on the opposite side of the Danube River, and evidently by the time we got there they had taken most all the German which were prisoners out of there, and probably put them in a prison compound. And but anyway, Linz was the home of one of our movie actresses, and she was my favorite. I'll swear I cannot think of her name. Had gold black hair, beautiful girl. If I could pronounce her, come up with her name, I'm sure you would remember it. But anyway,
was Linz the place that you worked with the German prisoners?
Yes, right. The right at the city limits, you might say the countryside was beyond, but yeah, the German prisoners were in the city of Linz. Linz has a beautiful plaza, you can call it a plaza, and it's pretty huge. And there was a Roman Catholic church on one corner. I went in it one time when they were having service, and it was a Roman Catholic church. And anyway, we
What were some of your, what did you do with the German prisoners? You were telling me that you interrogated them?
yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because they had what they called a soul book, S-O-L-D-T book, and it was their personal history of the service in the military, and they gave that to me, and I forgot to tell you, this, we were in the open air with a canopy over it and so on, and there were thousands of prisoners there, but they, I chose the letters Ibis M, I to M, and there was a stack of legal-sized paper, probably about 1.5 feet or 2 feet tall, that had the names of Germans that our country, the Allies, wanted. And we checked the name every time someone come through. And I don't believe I ever had a prisoner that was on the list. But that didn't mean anything either, because my first question to them was, linky armhole, left arm high, and their blood group number, if they were in the SS, was tattooed underneath the line. And I did interrogate quite a number of those that were in the SS, and excuse me, my buddies, we divided the alphabet up into 4 sections, and I don't know how many hundred I had, but quite a lot of them. And my buddies, I was acquainted with all of them, had about an equal number of the alphabet that our government and the Allies were interested in grabbing. And I don't know whether I mentioned this or not, but I didn't find but just a very few people that were on my list that our country and the Allies were interested in securing. So,
as the war was winding down, what was going on during that time?
Comes to the reversing myself, comes to the point where this movie actress had her home on the other side of the Danube, and it was very peaceable, and actually you were inclined not to be able to get to sleep because you were used to hearing artillery come over, you know, and that was one and only time that I wasn't able to get any sleep that I wanted. So, do you think we pretty well covered things again?
Yes.
But if you think of anything, like...
When did you finally get out of the military? When were you discharged?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Oh, yeah, and here's another story I've got to tell you. Major Wendell Compton, he was a major, no, he was a first lieutenant when I first met him. And his grandfather owned Miles Laboratory in Elkhart, Indiana, and Major Compton ended up as a CEO, and he went back to civilian life, CEO of Miles Laboratory. And so our division broke up about the last day of August 1944, and at that time they went by the point systems, what they call the point systems, to be discharged, and I wasn't married or anything like that. If you were, I think you got 10 points for being married or whatever.
Which means you would have gotten out a little bit quicker.
Right. So I didn't have a great lot of points. You got double points for being overseas, as I recall. And so anyway, I had heard that Major Compton, I had heard he was a major at that time. I heard he was a division ordnance officer up in Ingolstadt, Germany. And so I was sent up to, when they deactivated the 65th Infantry Division, I was sent up to Ingolstadt, and I thought, well, I'd sure like to see Major Compton. And I knew the next day was going to be Sunday, and I said I knew exactly where to find him on Sunday. He'd be singing in the choir. And so, needless to say, I went to church on Sunday, and sure enough, I spotted him up there in a beautiful section of the church, and I hurried to the back of the church, and I knew where the stairway would lead up and down. So, make the story short, here he come down the steps. He says, "Sergeant Steve, my goodness, it's good to see you. I had worked with him in the States." And he says, "Are you looking for a job?" I said, "I sure am." He said, "You tell them up there at personnel in the morning, this is in Ingolstadt, to send you out, to drive you out to the division ordnance headquarters." And he says, "You've got a job." And it was a wonderful reunion. And Colonel Compton, and he was a lieutenant colonel at that time, and he lived in Elkhart, Indiana, where his pharmacy was located. So I'm glad you said something, because it reminded me that I've thought of Colonel Compton many, many times, because he was a wonderful man. But he passed on in 1983.
Mr. Stevens, I know you received a number of medals, awards, honors. Can you talk about those for me?
I'll tell you in a minute. Let's see. The Purple Heart. The Purple Heart that we just got, as you know,
After 67 years, you
Yes.
finally got your Purple Heart.
Yes. uh, and that it gets back to the fact that Colonel Anton says, I'm going to wire this information to Washington, D.C. And he says, when you get home, you can go there or contact them, and you're going to get the Purple Heart. And I don't know what happened. They blame it on a clerical error now, but that's a good excuse, I guess, good as any. But anyway, losing my train of thought here.
You got the Army Good Conduct.
Yes.
Europe.
Oh, yes. There's another name I want to mention to you too in just a minute. Yes, here they are over here.
Okay.
The Purple Heart on the left, Good Conduct Nag, European Theater. I forget what those last two are. And the Presidential Citation down below. And of course my rank at the end of the war. And up high you'll see a combat infantry badge. And I'm so proud of that. Not as much as I've learned after the Purple Heart, but
What does that badge mean?
You were in combat, facing the guns. Yeah. And you can bet that the Germans had a gun ready. If they met you, they were going to use it. And we got, by the way, we got $25 extra every month as long as we were in the military for being a combat infantryman. And even after the war was over, I got home and so on. My older brother had been in the Pacific during the war, and he enjoyed the hot weather, and he got it. But anyway, I'm rattling on here and losing my train of thought.
Looking back on your military career, what are some things that you have taken away from it?
Glad you mentioned that. We're getting back to my dear friend and my brother's companion. Were the same age as my older brother, John J.W. Thorne, Thorne. There were 3 houses on our block. We had a beautiful 2-story house. The next house was Mr. and Mrs. Barnhart. They were elderly. And the next house on the next corner was J.W. Thorne and his sister Elaine and their mother. And their mother had remarried. Her first husband had died in the flu epidemic of 1918, I guess it was. But anyway, J.W. was in the 666th Engineer Battalion, Combat Engineers. And they were attached, of all goodness, attached to our division. And I didn't know that for a long time. And J.W. and I were corresponding with each other, and it probably took 2 weeks to get to us when we were about 5 miles apart. And to make the story short, J.W. and one of his buddies were walking up a hill, and the Germans were firing artillery over at their regiment. A fragment of this artillery hit J.W. in the Ford, and I corresponded with his sister, Elaine, and she said that he was taken to the hospital immediately, and said on the next day the chaplain was sitting with him, and he said, and I had a letter from his sister that the chaplain said J.W. was fretting and kind of out of his head, and the chaplain recited the 23rd Psalm. It stays with you. That's the worst part. But J.W. quieted down and passed on. He's passed on. He was a dear friend of, at my older brother's age, so you can believe how close we were. And this, I have to mention this. The elderly couple that lived between us was his grandparents, and they had 3 boys in the Army, and one was killed on the death march that the Japs had, and another one was injured, evidently severely, and was in Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, D.C., and he passed on after a number of years. I'm not sure whether the 3rd boy is still around or not, but anyway, keep in mind there's 3 boys there, and there were 2 of us in the next, and then on the other corner was J.W. So that was a good selection of Army men, and they all were. We were all, well, my brother Murray Stevens was losing my train of thought here.
What branch did your brother serve in?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, he was in the Air Corps.
Air Corps.
Yeah.